Okay, so let's start building a framework for understanding supply and demand. How we're going to do this is we're going to have two figures that are linked to each other via their vertical axis. Okay? This figure over here describes how a firm responds, and on the horizontal axis we have their individual supply Q, and on the vertical axis we have the price that they face, denoted in dollars. The other side here in this other market, let's try and draw that a little bit carefuler. We've got the entire market, okay? Which I denote with a capital Q. All right, and we can start filling in some information here. For example, suppose all firms are identical and we've got marginal cost here. Okay? This is increasing marginal cost as we indicated before, and we're going to assume, this tells us basically the supply decision of the firm because they're going to set the price equal to marginal cost. We can take this information and that tells us something about what the supply curve for the entire market is. Because if all firms are the same, then when we multiply this individual supply curve by the number of firms in the market, we're going to get something that looks the same. It might have a different slope because slope is rise over run, and we've got different units on the horizontal axis, but it's going to have the same shape, okay? Meaning that if it's got a curve in the individual level, it's got to have a curve on the market level. If it starts at price equal to 50 on the individual level, that means no firms supply under the price of 50 individually, and that has to be the same in the market too. On the market side, the horizontal or the vertical axis, the dollar thing here, is supposed to be the exact same as the firm. The horizontal axis might be different, but the vertical one's the same. So we need it to be a straight line, but it doesn't have to have the same slope. So individual supply comes from marginal cost equal to price. Market supply is we add up all the marginal cost curves together and we get a supply curve. Let's add to this the demand side. So we have consumers, and we don't need to draw the decision making of an individual consumer. It's not very useful. It's not particularly interesting. And we can just draw any kind of downward sloping thing. Okay? And we're drawing them on the same axis now. Where the supply and the demand cross is called the equilibrium. Okay? And we tend to assume that that's the point the market finds. I should do a capital Q because this is the whole market. If supply is equal to demand, that means that we've found a price where the amount consumers want to buy exactly matches the amount firms want to sell. And if we're not at that point, then adjustments happen to take us there. Okay? If there's too many goods, then that means you have to lower the price to induce consumers to buy them. But if you lower the price, firms don't want to make as many, and so that pulls us back to this Q star. If you make too few goods, consumers are willing to spend a higher price than on the goods. That induces more firms to produce them, and we get moved towards Q star again. Only when we're right there in the middle is there no incentive to deviate from this point, because exactly at the price that's out there, firms want to make Q star and consumers want to buy Q star. Great. So we've all seen probably this figure on the right, but now we can talk about how it communicates with the figure on the left. The price that is arrived at by the market gets translated back to this graph because they share the same vertical axis. And this tells us where each individual firm makes their own supply decision. Okay? So where price equals marginal cost, that tells us what an individual does. Now, as I mentioned in the last unit, or in the last video, this is all in the short run. If we want to talk about the long run, we need to add in average cost. Now, how are we going to draw this average cost curve? I said we could draw it as a U. And that's true. That's how we're going to do it in this unit. But we have to be careful about one thing. And I'm going to take a little detour here to explain this. We'll come back to that figure. It turns out there's a close link between marginal cost and average cost. When marginal cost is less than average cost is declining. Conversely, when marginal cost is greater than average cost is increasing. Okay? Why is that the case? Remember, marginal cost is the cost to make one more unit. Okay? So if the cost to make one more unit is less than the average of making units so far, then it's going to pull the average down. Okay? Like, think in concrete numbers. If it cost you on average $100 for the first 10 units, but the 11th unit is going to cost you only $50, then you're going to make 11 units, and the total cost is only going to go up 50 instead of 100, and so the average over those 11 goes down. Conversely, if the marginal cost is greater than average cost, then that means it's getting more and more expensive to make new units, and each additional unit costs more than the average of all the ones that came before it. So when we add it to the pile, we pull that average up. Okay, so if the first 10 units cost $100 each to make on average, but then the 11th costs $200, then the cost goes up from $1,000 to $1,200, but we're only making 11 units, and the average goes up from $100 per unit to something slightly more. Okay, and this has implications for how we correctly draw this figure. Okay. It implies, for example, at the point where the marginal cost equals average cost is minimized. And so if we're going to have average cost look like a U, then marginal cost needs to cut through the U at the exact bottom of the U. Okay? Notice on the left, I've got marginal cost less than average cost, and I'm drawing average cost declining through that whole period. And on the right of this point, I've got marginal cost greater than average cost, and it's increasing at this point. So this is why it's important. It's important for how we're going to correctly draw these figures. Okay, we don't really know at this point whether I should draw this thing higher or lower. Let's draw it. Let's draw it like this. Here's my average cost. Okay. All right. So this tells me that at this price, firms are making positive profit because the average cost is less than the price that they're charging. Okay, so that means firms make money. They're not going to exit the market. But it's not going to stay here forever either. There's one more line that we're now going to add to this figure, okay, which is the long run supply. What happens if the market is in this position here? Well, it's profitable to be in this market, okay, because price is above marginal cost. If it's profitable to be in this market, then that means more firms are going to want to enter this market, okay, because firms seek out profitable opportunities, okay. As more firms enter, the total supply in the market increases, and the supply curve here starts to shift, okay, because remember, capital Q star is equal to N times Q star, where N is the number of firms. So if we have more firms entering because it's profitable, we're going to have more supply because they're each going to supply where price equals marginal cost. That's going to push the supply out, something like this. Okay, so this is supply 2. And eventually we're going to reach a point where the price that they arrive at here, so this will be price 2, is equal to both marginal cost and average cost. Okay? The point where that happens is called the long run supply. Okay? What does that mean? That the long run supply is a horizontal line that is fixed at the minimum average cost. And this is the supply and price to which this market tends in all situations in the long run. Why do I say the long run? Because it takes time for new firms to enter and old firms to exit. Okay. So long run supply is, where am I going to write this? Down here. Long run supply is a horizontal line at the minimum average cost. That implies that in the long run, price equals marginal cost and marginal cost equals average cost, because at the minimum average cost, marginal cost and average cost equal each other. And that also implies that in the long run, profits are zero because firms exactly cover their costs. Okay. And so this is one of the assumptions of perfect competition, but it's important to point out that zero profits doesn't necessarily mean that firms are like on the verge of bankruptcy. We'll talk about what it exactly means more precisely in the next video.